The original Metroid on the NES is a game I have started and subsequently dropped without even being close to completing an incredible amount of times. So much so that I've started to associate the game with a feeling of hopelessness, almost. It had gotten so bad that when I started up the game to play it for this video, I got a sinking feeling in my stomach. You know, that feeling you get when you know you've done something you shouldn't have, like stealing candy from the store or being hunted down by the child you failed to kill during a raid now equipped with a superpowered exoskeleton. Despite this feeling, I've always wanted to truly experience the start of the Metroid franchise since it's so very dear to me. Oh, and there's also a new game coming out soon that's going to be the continuation of the story told throughout the 2D Metroid games, so I guess there's that too. Truly sitting down and playing this game have always felt like it was going to be an unnecessary time sink, especially since we have the Game Boy Advance Remake Zero mission that not only upgrades the original to a more modern standard, but also adds a lot of new content. I do, however, think that playing through Metroid on the NES still has its merits. For its time, Metroid was a very unique game, and yet it is also a game that is very much a product of its time. A lot of the games in the 1980s were hard, like balls to the wall hard, like wanting to take a diarrhea dump onto the face of Bugs Bunny hard. Some of these games had an unforgiving difficulty to artificially lengthen the game. Most of them simply suffered from bad game design. Metroid seems like it largely falls into the first category, although that isn't true for the entirety of the game. The difficulty is certainly there, and while some parts might admittedly be unfair, a lot of the difficulty is based on observing enemy patterns and devising ways to either get around them or defeat them as efficiently as possible. There's actually a ton of different enemy types here, ranging from very simple enemies that simply crawls along the walls or does their own thing while not paying any attention to Samus, to enemies that are reactive to Samus's movements. A lot of these enemies have different designs too, depending on where on planet Zebes you are, and some enemy types are even unique to the different areas. I actually find the variety of enemies quite fascinating, and considering the limitations of the NES, they sure did a good job of making them feel unique. Take the Scree family, for example. They'll hang out on the ceiling and will only drop down to try and skewer you when you walk into range, which makes it easy to dispatch of them if they attack from on high, since you can just stand beneath them and shoot upwards, or run right past. But when they're lower towards the ground, you'll need to take them out before walking underneath them most of the time. My favorite enemy, well, okay, I kinda hate them also, has to be the Rio family of creatures. These will swoop down towards you and then go back up when you jump, which makes you have to actually think a bit instead of just running straight ahead. They're also very fast, so you can't really outrun them, which makes it so you have to jump at some point if you don't want to get hurt. The way you deal with these guys also changes depending on how much room you have to move in, where if you're in a tight corridor, your best bet is to shoot them with a missile on their way down, which requires somewhat precise timing. As you can see, early in the game, it's imperative that you learn all of these guys' movements, because you start out with basically nothing. Just a pea shooter that won't even instill fear in the weakest of enemies. But you won't stay like that for long. This is where the unique trait of the Metroid games come into play. The entire game is basically a puzzle labyrinth, and to progress in said labyrinth, you need to find certain upgrades which are scattered around the map. Not only will they unlock more sections of the map, but they will also make you more powerful. When first starting out, Zebes can feel like a huge place. Thankfully though, the game uses the first 30 minutes or so basically guiding you to where you need to go. When you first start the game and walk right, you'll meet a dead end. Insert "why can't Metroid crawl" meme here. Thus the game forces you to head back and discover the Mari Mari power-up. Or as someone who's not a weeb would say, the Morph Ball. If you've watched any, and I mean any video on the NES Metroid game, I'm sure you already know what this is supposed to reveal to the player. What a lot of people fail to mention though, I hope, or this will sound really pretentious, is that this guiding, if you will, continues on a little while further. See, you can basically explore everywhere you like, but there's only one path you can follow to actually make any progress. But that path isn't the immediately obvious one, which is something I really think more people should commend the game for. Basically, if you keep going through the first door you see every time, you'll end up in front of a red door a little ways into Brinstar. You can't actually do anything about this yet, so you'll need to go back and explore some more, which is when you're supposed to happen upon the first missile pack. At this point, you could easily continue on through and enter Norfair, only to get stuck there after a while, since you don't have the necessary tools to progress. It's weird to me how they set it up so that you're able to move forward when there's literally nothing there for you until you have more tools at your disposal. And there's literally nothing in Norfair at this point that you actually need the missiles to do. See, what you're actually supposed to do after getting that first missile pack is to go back to one of those red doors you encountered earlier on if you explored a bit before arriving here. Chances are that you did explore that long hallway after the second shaft and discovered that red door, but even if you didn't and went straight to Norfair, there's not that much you can do down there except for finding a few missile packs, so you're naturally guided back up to continue exploring Brinstar. At this point, you have two options. You either head back to that elusive red door or explore elsewhere. Either way, you're going to find a power-up. There's the long beam that's slightly hidden behind a door a little bit up the first shaft. Anyways, behind door number 2, there's the bombs, which you can use when in Morph Ball mode. While heading back, you might try to move further up the shaft, but there aren't any platforms, just a bunch of flying enemies moving back and forth. This is the first of a lot of subtle hints. See, while the obvious guiding stops here, the game is still slightly nudging you in the right direction throughout the entire thing. The problem is that you need to be in the right mindset to pick up on it, and so far, the game itself hasn't made much of an effort to elicit that kind of thinking. So, since there's no other way to go, you have to make the trek back once again. During the walk back, you'll pass through this room. If you have a high passive perception, you'll notice that the enemy in the lava is moving in an odd pattern. This is supposed to trigger your curiosity to make you try and get down there, and since you just got a new toy, which also is the only tool you have in your disposal to actually attack anything underneath height, so it should come naturally to the player to bomb the entire floor here to look for secrets. Now, if you don't have a passive perception above 18, I have to kindly ask you to roll a perception check. Oh, would you look at that? A natural 1. Yeah, you're not noticing shit. So basically, you'll end up heading back to the only place you know there are bombable blocks, and end up in Kraid's lair, where the enemies are so strong that, at this point, you'll most likely die almost instantly. I suppose the designers assumed you'd be able to pick up on this weirdly behaving enemy since you'd have walked through here 4 times at this point if everything had gone as planned. But if there's something I've learned from DMing Dungeons & Dragons, it's that nothing goes as planned, especially when it comes to human players. If you discover the secret and head down, you'll find the Ice Beam. This power-up lets you freeze enemies in place and even use them as platforms. As you might not have guessed from that description, the Ice Beam isn't actually required to beat the game. Very few power-ups are, in fact, but it'll be damn near impossible without it, especially for a first-timer. The major flaw here, then, is this. If you miss the enemy that's behaving weird, there's nothing telling you there's even anything down there, and that's very damning for such an important tool. Granted, there is another Ice Beam that can be gotten in Norfair, but that one's only slightly less cryptically hidden than the one in Brinstar. Even if you were to map out the place, there are no missing connections, like an unexplored door or an area you can't get past, and this is true for both of these locations. It's just not fair to the player to not only assume that they'll have passed through that room at least 4 times, but even to expect them to notice that small of a hint to begin with. If this was just some random missile pack instead of the Ice Beam, I probably wouldn't have been so critical of it, but just the fact that they did the exact same thing as I described above with the unexplored doors and such later in the game shows that they were still somewhat aware of the problem, right? I mean, hell, they even do a much better job later on with almost the exact same scenario, only this time the enemy literally flies up in your face from the hidden room below you. Even still, this isn't the only time this problem comes up. If you head back to those flying enemies and freeze them with your newly gotten Ice Beam and climb up, you'll find an energy tank. But more importantly, if you've gotten this far, you've probably started getting into that Metroid mindset, so trying to bomb the wall in the back probably seems like a good idea. This is actually just a shortcut, so even if you don't, you can also get here from the door on the top of the second Brinstar shaft, but either way, you'll encounter this room. At first glance, it might seem a lot like that other room, which led to the ice beam, except that flying enemy is now in the actual corridor. Bombing the floor here has no effect. The secret lies in shooting the ceiling blocks in the middle of the room, which will reveal a path upwards. There's literally no chance of discovering this by dispatching the enemy, since only an insane individual would ever move under one of those things and shoot upwards to take them out. Any sane player would just use a well-timed missile. So again, there's nothing significant pointing towards there being a secret here, which is disappointing, since it's hiding one of the most useful items in the entire game, the Varia suit, which cuts all damage you receive in half. Well, before that, you'll need the high jump boots to actually access the door, or do you? But at least you'd know that there's actually something there. Believe it or not though, these boots are hiding behind yet another instance of bad level design. You can explore pretty much the entire upper half of Norfair with just the first missile pack. To enter the second half, you have to bomb this very specific spot in this very inconspicuous place. Again, there's nothing pointing to this being the case. The game solely relies on you being deep in the Metroid mindset, trademark, at this point, and to be looking for secrets literally everywhere. This is also the only passage into the lower half of Norfair, which makes this doubly annoying. I'm almost tempted to say that it's not that big of a deal, since apart from the high jump boots, the only power-up that has any worth whatsoever to be found here is the screw attack, which is more of a quality of life improvement than anything, but you actually need to travel through here to get to Ridley's lair, so... Anyways, for the sake of the argument, let's recap where you'd be if you hadn't discovered the Ice Beam and the Varia suit, but had explored the rest of Brinstar and the upper part of Norfair at this point. Seeing as you never discovered these secrets, I'll also be assuming that you never got into the Metroid mindset, trademark, so I'll be taking that into account when deciding where you've explored, assuming you'd only have found the more obvious places. At least that was how it was for me. You'd have the Morph Ball, the Long Beam, the bombs, 6 missile packs for a total of 30 missiles, and a single energy tank for an added 100 HP. That's it. And you also would have no idea how to progress, either having nowhere to go in Norfair or getting your ass handed to you in Kraid's lair, which would only incite pure unadulterated frustration. This is one of the biggest problems with the original Metroid. Seeing as there aren't any real directions given, at a certain point you have to either be really lucky or you have to start guessing where you need to go, and that point is relatively early on in the game as well. Now let's consider a different scenario, where the devs actually try to properly point you in the right direction and constructed the map in a way that would clue you in on these early hidden rooms, which would have organically embedded the Metroid mindset, trademark, in you, also making the entire rest of the game more fun in the process. If they did that, then you'd at this point most likely be sitting at, and get ready, the Morph Ball, the Long Beam, the bombs, the Ice Beam, the Varia suit, 7 missile packs for a total of 35 missiles, with the location of 2 more probably being known, 2 energy tanks for a total of 299 HP, the high jump boots, and at the very least access to Ridley's lair, if not the entirety of Lower Norfair, where you'd be able to find even more missile packs, energy tanks, and the screw attack. Also the wave beam, but who the hell uses the wave beam? If they had properly guided you on this track, you would now have been fully prepared to face the dangers of the deeper parts of Zebes, the boss layers, without being overly powerful, and would have prepared you for the line of thought needed to fully discover the secrets of Zebes, which is good, because when the Metroid mindset, trademark, finally kicks in, it truly is fun to look for and find even just a single missile pack. Of course, although this is a bit ironic, I am proposing these fixes assuming that the player would actually draw up their own map to notice the hidden rooms and such. Because believe it or not, I actually think that the act of having to draw the map as you go along is one of the more appealing parts of the original Metroid. A lot of the critiques you see on the internet likes to hone in on the lack of a proper way to navigate in the game. Well, they actually do supply a... Okay, fine. While the blob of a map they give you in the manual isn't exactly very helpful, they do literally tell you to make your own. This is where I've struggled every time I've tried to play. I never made a map, so usually what would happen is I'd get lost, get bored, and go, fuck it, and throw my controller at the TV.
Oh, jeez!
Admittedly, making a map doesn't magically solve the problem of not knowing where to go, but it at least gives you somewhat of an overview of where you've been, and it also keeps you from getting lost while backtracking to look for secrets. It's pretty easy to just give the map a quick glance and realize that, of course, that's where I went wrong. I've always liked the notion of interacting with a map in a video game beyond just reading it, whether that be literally making the map from scratch like in the Etrian Odyssey games, or simply jotting down notes and drawings like in Phantom Hourglass. It helps making it feel like you're exploring new territory, as if you're on an actual adventure through unknown lands. Like, I'll readily admit, I'm not super artistic or good at drawing or painting or anything like that, but honestly, you don't have to be. Making a map for a Metroid game might seem daunting at first if you look at maps from the later games, but the truth is that the original Metroid isn't that complex at all. It doesn't have sloping hallways or multiple pathways within the same room. At most, it has 2 doors or the occasional hidden passage, but that's about it. I honestly think you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't draw the map yourself. Doing this has been one of the most engaging gaming experiences I've had in a while, and literally all you need is a blank piece of paper and a pencil. Because of this, I think that it's very weird how a good majority of the people talking about this game uses the lack of an in-game map as one of the main examples of why it's a badly designed game, and actually recommends you go and find a map online if you want to play it, and I don't think that is very fair. Complaining about the lack of a map in Metroid is like going to McDonald's and ordering a soft drink, and then get mad when you spill soda on your shirt after trying to drink it straight from the cup because you couldn't be bothered to insert the straw through the lid yourself. Although a lot of people cite the lack of a map as a bad thing, there is a common consensus here that I do agree with, which is that you need a map to fully enjoy this game. There's really only a handful of different set pieces that can be found here, and even if they aren't always positioned at the same place in any given room, they're still not varied enough to be able to be reliably used as landmarks. It's very easy to lose your way, sometimes even with a map handy, since there's a bunch of room variations that are repeated ad nauseum. Take a look at this part of Kraid's lair, for example. This is a fucking travesty. 3 identical rooms on top of each other with a monotone shaft on each side, and there's absolutely nothing to be found in any of the rooms. This entire part could have just been deleted from existence. These rooms serve absolutely no purpose at all. You don't have to go here to progress, and there's no power-ups to be found. There's just a bunch of annoying and super strong enemies which will most likely whittle down your HP until they kill you if you try to explore the whole thing. Which leads me into another huge problem I have with this game. When you respawn after dying, you start with 30 health regardless of how many energy tanks you've collected. Shit like this makes me want to call this game a roguelite. Could you imagine Metroid on the NES being the first roguelite? You might not think respawning with only 30 HP is a huge issue. After all, you can just kill some enemies for some extra health, right? But the tedium of this process is not to be underestimated. Most enemies only have a chance of dropping 5 unit orbs of health when defeated, with the 20 unit orbs being reserved for tougher enemies who have more complex movement patterns and deals much more damage. So basically, you just end up farming the easy ones, of which the only real option is the ever respawning flyer enemies. Be it in Brinstar, Norfarer, or the Lairs, these enemies only drop 5 unit orbs, which means you'll be doing an awful lot of this. As you can see, they also stop respawning once they drop a collectible, and won't continue coming out until you've collected it, which means that if you kill them too close to their spawn point, you'll end up getting damaged the second you grab the collectible, potentially setting you back 5 HP at the very least, and up to 20 at the most, which if you're unlucky can set you back an entire minute of grinding. Now, believe it or not, this isn't that much of an issue in the earlier parts of the game, since you'll be doing a lot of traveling and exploring anyways, and the enemies aren't so strong that you need to grind health, much less fill all your energy tanks. The problem arises properly when you get down to the boss layers. So, when you die, you respawn at 30 HP. You also respawn at the last elevator you took, and that's fine and good, unless you're in the layers. The enemies here deal twice the damage as ones up top, so that's 2 hits without the Varia suit and 3 hits with the damage reduction it provides. And I promise you, you will not get far with that, because there are some real bullshit moments in this game. The worst of which relates to enemy placement. Some of these bastards are just damn near unavoidable. The game likes to place 2 flyers next to each other, and because of the side-scrolling nature of the game, they spawn slightly after one another, which makes them hard to avoid, but hey, you can just freeze them with an ice beam shot, right? Well, it's kinda difficult to aim when you need to focus on platforming as well as avoiding a third enemy, but yeah, you can just do that. Enemies also have knockback, so when there's lava somewhere, you're almost bound to fall into it and see your health literally melt away. They also like this setup a lot for some reason, where there's a relentless flyer charging at you with a jumper right below you. It's not impossible to avoid, it might seem a bit daunting at first, but at the very least, if you don't have a lot of health and decide to go back and find another way around, then for the love of God, make sure that you kill the flyer before exiting the room, or else this happens. There's also these long corridors with low ceilings. I guess they wanted to challenge the player in having them actually defeat the enemies instead of avoiding them, but that's pretty damn near impossible in these cases. It doesn't even matter if you have the screw attack here, since there's not enough room to reliably execute it properly. There's also the bosses, who are nothing more than giant damage sponges that randomly spits out projectiles which are hard to avoid and makes it even harder to deal any damage. Except I got kinda lucky and Ridley bugged out, so I just stood next to him and fired missiles into his crotch for like a minute or so. But Kraid was a total asshat to deal with. So I died, and then died some more, and every time I respawned with 30 goddamn HP. The worst part is that these problems by themselves aren't significant enough to get this upset about. This entire rant would not exist if they just started you out with full health after you died. That's how simple the fix for this would be. This would also help with other things. What I'm alluding to here are the places where the game designers maybe didn't think things quite well enough through. For example, there are some places you can literally get stuck, like seriously soft-locking the game unless you kill yourself or reset the console to get out if you don't have the high jump boots, for example. Well, okay, let me bring in another quality of this game. I don't know if this was on purpose. Actually, I highly doubt it. But while trying to get out of this hole, which you enter to obtain the ice beam in Brinstar, I discovered bomb jumping. That is, I've played most of the other Metroid games, so I already knew about bomb jumping, but I didn't know how to execute it here. This opens up a bunch of possibilities, like getting the Varia suit on the first trip through Brinstar and such. This is what you would call a sequence break, getting an item before you're supposed to be able to, and they're used plenty throughout speedruns. Seriously, go watch any Metroid speedrun on YouTube. They're amazing. This would give the Metroid games a reputation of being extremely fluid, where if you knew the secret tricks and techs, you could skip a lot of content and get through the game really fast, even without making use of glitches. And later games in the series, like Super Metroid, would even embrace this approach to game design. In that sense, I guess you could compare Metroid to a jigsaw puzzle. You're given the first corner piece and need to work your way from there, piece by piece. After you've completed the thing, you'll see the whole picture, which makes it easier to complete it faster next time. And maybe, just maybe, you might be able to place a couple of pieces down before you should be able to. In a lot of cases though, unless you're going for a glitched run where you basically almost teleport to the end, the last piece of the puzzle will always be Turion and the fight against Mother Brain. This place is the reason why no one uses the wave beam. After taking a few steps into this place, this game's namesake, the Metroid, will come charging at you full speed ahead, and if they catch you, they'll disable all your weaponry except for the bombs, which means you only have one means of getting them to let go. If, however, you're caught by two of them at the same time, and even just slightly damage the first one before the second latches on, you're shit out of luck, since they'll just take turns sucking you off. The ice beam and missile combo, just like with about everything else in the game, absolutely destroys these fuckers though. And when you get to this point, this is by far the easiest way to grind HP, given that you've got enough missiles, since the Metroids can be dispatched off relatively easy and can drop like up to 30 units of health or something. And then there's the last boss. For a last boss, Mother Brain doesn't do very much. The challenge here, just like with the two others, lies more in dodging projectiles while blasting her with as many missiles as you can manage. The way the bosses are handled is actually somewhat disappointing. Like I pointed out, they're pretty much just standing around and throwing stuff at you, and the best course of action I could find was to just stock up on life, tank all the hits, and pray to God that they died before I did. There's no other obvious tactic you can use. You can freeze the projectiles with the ice beam, but more often than not, they just end up getting in the way of your missiles. I know this is an NES game, but there have been more exciting bosses in other games that didn't just stand still and peppered you with long-range attacks. It's not like there's a ton of stuff flying around everywhere either though. At least not in the Ridley and Crate fights, but the stuff that is flying around usually blocks any clear shot you have at the bosses, and there doesn't seem to be any pattern to their attacks. They just throw stuff out at random. I think they went a bit overboard with the projectiles in the Mother Brain fight though. The game is in a constant state of chug, which doesn't exactly make it any less annoying to try and get back up on these platforms after you've been knocked down by the ungodly knockback these things have. And then, finally, after the defeat of Mother Brain, the planet or lab or whatever begins a self-destruction mechanism, and you have to escape up a shaft with the smallest excuses for platforms I have ever seen. But don't worry, endless hours of grinding for ore in Maplestory's Forest of Patience have prepared me for this hurdle. In conclusion, if you've been on the fence about the original Metroid because of all the negative things you've heard about the game, give it a shot. Take a couple of hours out of your weekend, find a blank paper and a pencil, and sit down and properly play this game. It's not as bad as many people would have you believe. It does have some problems with, well, straight up bullshit level design and enemy placements, but that's why we have save states and the excellent rewind feature on the NES app on Switch. I am actually tempted to give them the benefit of the doubt when it comes to those problems too, because it does seem like a very off-its-time problem. The fact that a lot of important items are hidden behind secret passages that might be a bit too secret is bad too, but Metroid was a very revolutionary game for consoles. No one had quite tried something like this before, and the fact that they got so many things right on their first try, gameplay elements of which are still being used to this day, is worthy of a commendation. Amazingly, despite being a very old game, it still offers somewhat of a unique experience that's not easily found even nowadays, thanks to the fact that you almost have to draw your own map, something that's very much taken for granted these days, and as such, I'd say the original Metroid on the NES is still worth being played, even today. Also, Justin Bailey. There, you happy? Might even just look like an Oblivion character now that I think of